Hello everybody, this is Ronar, and welcome back to our Long War Overexplained. Today we'll be starting the class overview portion of the series, starting with the Ranger class. Now before we begin, I want to make it clear that first, this guide is specifically for Legendary Iron Man difficulty, so there are many strats that work on lower difficulties, but we only really care about the ones that are going to work on the higher levels of gameplay. And second, this video is mostly talking about Long War of the Chosen, but many aspects of Long War of the Chosen are exactly the same as in Long War 2, so no matter which one you're playing, the advice is likely going to be about the same. And let's begin. So with a guide like this, many people want a tier list or a ranking of how good each class is. I don't believe that there is a good way of ranking each class since they all have roles they can perform over other classes. Another thing is that since promotions from rookie rank are random, you can't really choose to make like 50% of your roster the better class. That being said, if you literally only care about knowing how good certain classes are in comparison to other classes, the list would go like this from best to worst. Shinobi, Reaper, Skirmisher, Templar, Sniper, Assault, Technical, Grenadier, Gunner, Specialist, Ranger. Now this is all very rough, and I don't think you should take a tier list like this to heart because there's a lot of things that could change and influence your decision making. So for example, the Shinobi class would be something that we would consider top tier. Same with the Sniper class. Sniper class would be like top of the list, or it should be, especially in the late game. Certain missions will be comprised of like 40 enemies, and just running in with your team is just going to activate the entire map and you're just going to die. So snipers are actually going to be top tier on those types of missions. But there's other types of missions like guerrilla missions and timed missions where having a sniper camp in a spot is actually just detrimental to your team. So what you want to do is not run a sniper, because sniper is actually literally the worst thing on the list, and even like the bottom of this current list that I'm giving you guys right now would just be better than the sniper in that case. Also, another thing that you have to worry about is the fact that early game, mid game, and end game, different classes will shine more. So for example, the sniper in the early game is actually the worst class in the entire game. Actually worse than a rookie, fact. But as you progress though, once you get to late game, mid game, your snipers start like just overtaking all the other classes. So what I want to do is be able to express to you guys how good a class is without just telling you guys, yeah, this class is better than that class. I want you guys to like know why mechanically, through like game mechanics, why this class is better in this type of situation, why it's better in overall more situations, and because it's better in overall more situations, or just much better in certain situations, that it ranks higher in that level. So we're going to start with the Ranger class. Now, the Ranger class is what I would consider to be probably the worst in the entire game, objectively. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't have its role. So just because the Ranger class is the worst doesn't mean like you just won't use it. There are ways to use it, there are reasons to use it, and it has its role in just about any team if you decide to. So let's take a look at the different builds you can go with it first. So first things first would be the Infantry build. This is literally just the Long War 1 Infantry build. You basically get to shoot twice. In fact, I'll go over a little bit about these perks. So light 'em up means they can shoot twice. Basically, taking a shot does not take 2 actions, or doesn't consume the remaining actions. It only takes 1 action. So you're allowed to shoot twice. You're allowed to shoot move, or move shoot. Well, other classes can move shoot, but you can shoot move, which is a little bit different. This is a class that tries to be a class based on firepower, but it ends up being used for other purposes. Now, the second weapon is called the sawn-off shotgun. It is incredibly powerful. You have only 2 shots of it though. You can either shoot off one shot with 1 action twice, or you can shoot off both shots at once and consume both your ammunition for the sawn-off, or both charges of the sawn-off shotgun. It uses a charge system, but it unloads double damage with that 1 shot. Now, this makes this unit really good for actually killing bosses, which is actually kind of interesting. So let's take a look at the default numbers, just to give you guys an idea. So normally you'd probably want to put an SMG or an assault rifle. There's 2 ways to build these guys. You can even put a shotgun on them, which makes them very versatile. But so let's start with the idea of the assault rifle. This is the basic idea. You'd shoot twice with the assault rifle. Then the other option is to build an SMG, and while this does no damage with the SMG, and they have like no accuracy from a distance, what this does mean you can do is, since you have higher mobility, you can run up to a boss unit and sawn-off shotgun. This actually makes the Ranger pretty okay once Advent starts reaching Force level 4, I think. Force level 4 is when they start bringing out Advent mechs, as well as mutons, I think mutons come out Force level 5, but about like when the big boss units come out. And the sawed-off shotgun is actually capable of one-shotting both mechs and mutons, which gives these guys an actual purpose at that point in the game. So early mid-game, you start to see a little bit of use out of these guys. You wouldn't really use them too much before that though, and after that point you just continue to use them as like solo boss killers, that kind of thing. But for the most part, that's kind of the role that they fulfill. The sawed-off shotgun does 5 to 9 damage. If you use both barrels, it does like 10 to 18 damage. It's crazy high amounts of damage. So yeah. Also in Long War of the Chosen, they're adding more levels of the sawed-off shotgun. In regular Long War 2, you only have the mag shorty and the ballistic sawed-off shotgun, but the ballistic sawed-off shotgun did so much damage that it could essentially last you until mag weapons. I think they've slightly nerfed it in Long War of the Chosen, and they're introducing a mag tier sawed-off shotgun as well as a plasma tier sawed-off shotgun. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I don't imagine that would change the role of the Ranger too much, so I'm not really going to go too much into that, but just so you guys know, there's actual tiers for that now. Oops. So those are kind of the equipment for the Ranger. Now, there's 3 builds. The first build used to be really interesting, and I actually played with this build a lot when I first started playing Long War 2. And overall, I'd say it's okay. It definitely has fallen off my list of builds after I've tried different Ranger builds. Overall, this is one of the weaker ones, so we'll go through all these perks a little bit. So Walkfire. Take a highly accurate shot with plus 30 bonus to hit, but half damage, and a minus 30 crit, uses 2 ammo. So basically this is used to pick off enemies on low HP, so this is good for if you need like a guaranteed source of damage for like a 1 HP, 2 HP enemy. Nothing really super impressive about this perk, that's just all there is to it. The next perk on this list is going to be Locked On. This is actually important for the infantry build, because what you need to use this for is to kind of... The infantry misses a lot. Whether it's the early game, mid game, even the late game, a lot of the late game enemy units have really high defenses, so it's really hard to hit them even through cover with like a superior scope and everything. So overall, you're probably going to need Locked On. I would say this is probably the best perk to take if you're running infantry, and as I said before, I don't really like the infantry build. Aggression is required for the infantry build. Your goal is to just stack, is just to become a stat stick. High accuracy, high crit chance, and just try to unload as much damage as possible. And in order to do that, you're definitely going to need aggression. After that, Executioner is... I actually would argue that you might want to take something else instead of that, like take Suppression, because that allows the infantry class to not just be like a stat stick that tries to shoot the enemies. Now you have utility in your kit, such as Suppression, where you can actually disable enemies if you can't kill them. I think that's important for just about any class, and you'll see that as a recurring theme, where a lot of classes might end up being stat sticks, but I usually try to like take a detour on one of these routes to just give them utility, give them something to do other than what they do best. Because if you only let them do what they do best, if they're in a situation where they can't do what they do best, then they're useless. And you're basically fighting, like, if you brought 5 people to a mission, you're basically fighting a 4-man mission. And that's not good, so I think having like one of these types of perks is always good. So over here I'd probably end up taking Suppression, but Executioner is okay, it's just helps you pick off enemies, and that's kind of what the infantry does best. Just kind of tries to pelt enemies with bullets, weaken them down, and then finish them off with Walkfire and Executioner. Bring 'em On is actually pretty important for the infantry build to work properly, because this build doesn't really do a lot of damage overall, coupled with the fact that enemies have like 45 defense from being in cover, 30 or 45 defense. You're essentially gonna have like very reduced damage on your shots. Think of accuracy as damage output. Your overall damage per turn is very low, because unless you have something to destroy cover for you, it's pretty hard to kill anything unless you're shooting at like a mech or something. Overall, Rangers are really good at killing boss units like mechs. Boss units that don't take cover are kind of the Rangers' forte, but you don't really see it too much of those until, you see a lot of those when mechs first start showing up. It's not a lot, but like, you really want to be able to kill them, and Rangers are really good at killing them at the point in which they show up. Then the mechs start getting less threatening once you get to laser weapons and you have like slightly upgraded equipment that's capable of killing them. And then eventually start finding more mechs, and overall, killing things of that nature is the Rangers' job, but they also need a lot of support. So it's like one of those issues where it's like, yes, their job is to kill enemies that stand out in the open, but there are other issues that a lot of these enemies are like heavily armored, and armor is especially effective against things that hit multiple times. So they need support from other classes, whether it's to destroy cover, remove armor, whatever of that nature. But Bring 'em On is important because we're building a crit build. Rapid Fire is going to be the big one here because what happens is now instead of just doing ×2 assault rifle damage, they're essentially doing ×3 assault rifle damage. You get to shoot and then Rapid Fire to shoot 3 times in a turn. And then for the final perk, I think Rupture is pretty good. Stat is fine. If you want to do Overwatch, that kind of is fine. It's not that great because you're not taking cool under pressure. But overall, if you're doing the infantry build, I would recommend Rupture. It gives you a little bit more utility. So instead of being the one to actually try to kill a boss, you can now shoot and then Rupture. And by doing that, you provide your teammates a little bit more damage against it, and that gives the Ranger a little bit more utility than just being the sole damage dealer on the team, which they're not very good at. Now, overall, as you guys know, I don't really think highly of the infantry build. I think much more highly of the other 2 builds, actually. So let's go with the defender build first. Also, don't worry about this line down here. If you guys are playing Long War 2, you guys might be wondering what this is. This is just free perks that are given through Long War the Chosen, and you spend AP on them. It's exactly the same as the AWC, except you get like 1 more perk, and you have to spend ability points on them. So we're gonna talk independent of this first, and then afterwards maybe I'll talk a little bit about some perks that work well with the Ranger class. Overall, I don't think there's anything here that works specifically well with them. But yeah, the Overwatch build. The Defender build, Sentinel build, however you want to call it. So, Ever Vigilant is going to be the requirement here, and one of the biggest issues with the infantry build is that it stands still and shoots. Now that's bad in XCOM Long War 2 because 1, missions are timed, so you don't have the luxury of standing still and shooting a bunch of times. You might have high accuracy, but that's much later on in the game. Early game, mid game, this is useless on timed missions. You're just not going to get much use out of this. Their best use is going to just be moving and flanking, and just about any class can like move to a position and shoot. So that's kind of their biggest downfall, is that they have to kind of stand still. They fall behind the team as the team tries to move up, and they're just kind of sitting in the same spot trying to shoot more times. So this fixes that. Ever Vigilant allows you to double move and still be able to Overwatch. Single move and do whatever is fine too, but if you ever need to double move, they can still go on Overwatch. And Overwatch is particularly good in Long War 2 because of how the yellow alert mechanic works. I never really covered red alert, yellow alert, and green alert, but just know that Overwatch hitting an enemy will cancel yellow alert, which is basically a chance that they get to take an action on you on the turn that they reveal. I'll talk about that in a different video, of course. But Covering Fire, I think Covering Fire is not particularly good. They did buff this in Long War 2. So if triggering an enemy action, Covering Fire will trigger before the enemy action completes, so you can Overwatch, and then if the enemy tries to move or shoot at you, you'll shoot at them first. Now, normally this is bad because what ends up happening is you're shooting at them while they're in cover, so you'd rather save your Overwatch for a different unit that was trying to move instead. But they did buff this a bit. So first of all, you cover an aim. You guys hear that? There's a dog barking outside. But basically, Covering Fire makes it so that all enemies that you Covering Fire against will lose 10 accuracy. Now, it's nothing big. It's not something like Suppression or anything like that, but it's a small bonus. And because the Ranger eventually gets a multi-shot Overwatch perk, which I'll talk about later, that offers a little bit more of consideration into this perk. Another thing is that when you're shooting at things within full cover, you get a little bit of an aim bonus. I think overall it's not worth it, and I'll talk about it a little bit more once we get to rapid reaction. But just know that Covering Fire, I think overall is not the greatest. I'd probably end up taking Pump Action more. Being able to sawn off shotgun twice in a mission is actually quite valuable. The next perk is Cool Under Pressure. Now, this is kind of a necessary perk for the Overwatch build. If you're going any other build, then like pick whatever you want, but with the Overwatch build though, you kind of have to take Cool Under Pressure. You get plus 10 aim while you're on Overwatch, so it basically takes your Overwatch from like 60-70% accuracy in the late game all the way up to like 80-90. That's actually a really big deal. And not only that, your shots can now crit! So now it's not just the base damage of the assault rifle that you're using, you can now add on even more. This is essentially just adding on like plus 2 or 3 damage every other shot, because you'll have like a 50% crit chance, because everything that's running Overwatch counts as flanked. That's really good. Then over here is kind of the weird perks. Executioner is fine, Fortify is also fine, Suppression is also a utility. I think Fortify is pretty good on this build because what ends up happening is if you're on Overwatch, a lot of the enemies will try to kill you, and if they start shooting at you and they hit you, then they kind of remove your Fortify or your Overwatch. So Fortify is good for those purposes. Executioner can make sure that your rapid reaction doesn't get cancelled, and suppression is for utility. I think overall these three I find fairly interchangeable. I don't really think there's a specific one I really prefer over the other ones. I think it's kind of up to playstyle. Do you want more reliable uses of your triple Overwatch shots? Do you want to make sure that your guy won't get interrupted, or do you want to just have that extra bit of utility? All three are fine. I don't dislike any of these three. I think overall you can just pick whichever one fits your playstyle better. And that's one of the things I like about Long War 2. There's a huge amount of player expression. Like in a lot of games, like let's say for example Dark Souls, right? Player expression is really big because it lets you do things like, oh, I want to play as a knight, a wizard, or whatever. And that's kind of one of the biggest draws about games. And for Long War 2, I think it's really big that there's really no like best build for everything. Like even though this build kind of sucks, you can try to make this build work if you want. Like you have a lot of options, which I think is cool. Some are better than others because we are playing on the highest difficulty, but overall there is a lot of flexibility for the player, and not just in like how you build your units, but in playstyle and everything too. Next up is Tech Sergeant. So Tech Sergeant, you can take Bring 'em On, Implacable, or Grazing Fire. Implacable doesn't really work with the Infantry build or the Overwatch build, but these two perks do. So it's between whether or not you want higher variance in damage or more consistent damage. So Grazing Fire will make it so that when you miss, there's a 50% chance that your shot becomes a graze. So if you're taking a 50% shot and you miss, there's a 25% chance that you graze after that. Or 50% chance that the shot is a hit, 25% chance that the shot is a graze, and 25% chance that a shot is a miss. So overall, it makes it a lot more consistent for rapid reaction, which we'll talk about in a bit. The other one is Bring 'em On. I actually like Bring 'em On a lot for the Overwatch build. It's like the difference between 3 enemies running your Overwatch and then leaving the turn low on HP versus dead. And I prefer my enemies dead, so I like taking Bring 'em On. It's kind of like just one of those things where you roll a chance to just eliminate an enemy from the board completely, and I think that's very valuable, especially in the late game. When you're fighting things like elite troopers, you really need that damage. Damage is actually very valuable. I personally opt to take Bring 'em On, but if you want consistency, Grazing Fire is perfectly fine too. Now over here, rapid reaction is what makes the Overwatch build work. So basically what the Overwatch build wants to do is you want to be able to hit Overwatch, and how rapid reaction works is each shot that you hit with Overwatch will give you another free shot, and you get up to 3 shots. So that is one of the reasons why I didn't like Covering Fire, because I didn't want one of my 3 Overwatch shots going into a unit in cover, and then suddenly just losing one of our Overwatch shots, or just ending the entire chain completely. You want your chain to go on as long as possible. So I find that Covering Fire, while it has merit to it, I think I prefer not to take it, just so if there's other enemies that are willing to move, they'll move and just die to it. My personal opinion, at least. And finally, on the final rank, it might be tempting to take Killzone, but I find that rarely do you ever get to shoot at more than 3 targets with Killzone unless you're using this perk to engage on a group of enemies, and there's other ways to engage on enemies. I actually prefer to take Combat Fitness or Rupture. Rupture gives you utility, and I think utility is pretty good. Rupture is a pretty good form of utility. In fact, I would argue it's the best Master Sergeant perk to take on the Infantry tree, or not the Infantry, the Ranger tree. Because the Ranger kind of does one thing, and it's just shoot things a bunch of times. And while shooting things a bunch of times generally works out okay, but if there's something that you can't really shoot, like everything's behind cover, everything's really far away from you, then sometimes you might want to just take Rupture, so you have the option to support your team. Like if a Sectopod still has all its armor and all you can do is shoot at it for like 1 damage, that's useless. But if you tag that thing with a Rupture, that's useful no matter what, right? And overall, I think just having a perk that gives you plus 100% chance to crit is actually really nice. Do note that in Long War 2 as well as Long War of the Chosen, Rupture is not actually a 100% guaranteed crit chance perk, it just gives you plus 100 on the roll for crit. So if the enemy has dodge and graze, then you can still fail your crit chance. So there's that. But that is kind of the Overwatch build, and overall, Infantry build is good for like big missions. They're kind of just a worse version of a sniper in my opinion on big missions. They're not very good on timed missions. On guerrilla missions, this is slightly better. The Overwatch build is okay, but the Overwatch build really shines the most when you're on one of those Haven Defense and Haven Invasion missions. So there's two particular types of missions where reinforcements drop infinitely, and one of them is the Haven Defense, and the other one is actually the hardest mission type in the game, the Haven Invasion. So the Haven Defense is basically the Advent Retaliation, one of the Advent Retaliation type. And basically, instead of starting off with enemies on the map, they start off by just alerting you to reinforcements, and then reinforcements will drop again and again and again. And of course, if you can't kill every single enemy that are dropped by the reinforcements every single round, then you quickly get overwhelmed because the number of advents going down while the number of your units stays the same. Proportionally, if you calculate the math behind it, then you're going to get outgunned and killed. So having something like the Overwatch build is actually very powerful for that, because basically when the enemies drop in, if they drop in near the ranger, you essentially eliminate like one or two of them. The remaining ones are low on HP and your team can clean it up very easily. So this build shines a lot on that. And then there's the dreaded Haven Invasion mission. Now, the Haven Invasion mission is very similar, except there's a ton more enemies and it happens in the late game. So oftentimes you just straight up die if you're not prepared for it. I've had so many good campaigns just die to that mission type, because that mission type is especially brutal. And basically what'll happen is they'll start dropping reinforcements every round. Similarly to the other stuff, except the reinforcement pods are larger and there's much tougher enemy types. So if you have a build that's up to rapid reaction at the very least on a fairly good ranger with decent stats, you're going to wreck that mission type, because oftentimes the reinforcements drop in a fairly close by spot within each other. They're not gonna just like drop it across the map or anything. So if you have a ranger in a good spot, you can essentially whittle that down, and you can have like the ranger and like 2 or 3 other people dealing with the reinforcements while everyone else deals with every other enemy type on the map. And I think that makes the ranger invaluable for that role. So as I've said before, this is a class that doesn't really shine on most of the missions in the game, which is why they're rated so low, but that doesn't mean they don't have a role. They still have a role, even though like timed guerrilla missions are like 90% of the missions in the game. They have a role on the few missions that do matter, and it definitely doesn't hurt to train 1 or 2 of these guys up. And another thing that they can do is Haven Advisor. They're actually one of the best Haven Advisors in the game, because what ends up happening is the resistance recruits have trouble killing things like high HP units like mutons, baseless, things of that nature, and the sawed-off shotgun deals with all of that really effectively. Having a ranger is one of the best Haven Advisors in the game available, in my opinion, just because of how much damage they can deal in just one shot, and a lot of the other classes you would rather have on your missions instead. So yeah, that is going to be those 2 builds. We'll go over the last build. Now this is a very interesting build. I once did a really hilarious build where I max out mobility on a soldier and then just basically had them running around with the sawn-off shotgun and just killing everything, but let's go over these perks. So close and personal, confers plus 30% critical chance against adjacent targets. The bonus declines with distance from the target. It starts from 5 tiles away, so up to 5 tiles away you get a little bit of crit chance, and the closer you get, the more crit chance you get against your target. Now this is actually one of the perks required for assaults to get 100% crit chance, and that's on this class. You can opt to put a shotgun on these guys and then just take close and personal. That is an option. Or you can put an SMG on them to make them run a little bit faster to use their sawn-off shotgun. That's actually not as bad of a build as it might seem like. At first I used to think like it would be a funny meme build, and that's what it started off as for me on my stream, but eventually we found out that this build actually like had merits, because a lot of the times you're doing a guerrilla mission with like 9 enemies on it, anywhere between 8 to 9 enemies, and usually 1 or 2 of those enemies will be a boss unit, like a muton or a mech. And having a guy to just be able to run up to that muton or mech and just one-shot it so everyone else can do their thing is very, very strong. So if you want a guerrilla mission ranger, this is the build to work with. So pump action gives you 2 extra sawn-off shotgun along with your initial 2 ammo. So now you get to either shoot your sawn-off shotgun 4 times, or point blank twice, or point blank both barrels once, and then shoot off your regular shots twice. So this gives you more ammo on your sawn-off shotgun, and I think that's pretty valuable. One shot of a regular sawn-off shotgun pretty much guarantees a kill on things like a drone or a basic trooper in the early game, so that's another big deal about that. Now over here in the next slot, center mass is kind of interesting, and it's kind of that perk where it's like, It's a really good perk. Anytime you have anything that increases your damage by 1 point and you have a class that shoots twice, it's actually a really good perk. So for example, if you were running the infantry build, if you chose not to go aggression, that'd actually be fine. You could take center mass. Excuse me, I just burped in. It was probably really disgusting. But center mass is a perk that allows you to do more damage in the early game, because in the early game you don't really have a lot of accuracy and you don't have a lot of crit chance to begin with, so having plus 30 crit chance doesn't really increase like your crit chance against your enemies that much, while later on in the game when you have like laser sights, you have buffs from the officers and your officers are hollow targeting for you, aggression actually becomes a lot better as the game goes on. It's more damage later on in the game, but center mass is more damage early on in the game, so depending on what you think you're struggling with the most, you might want to consider taking center mass. Now for the sawn-off shotgun build, you don't care about your primary weapon. You care about just buffing up your sawn-off shotgun, and aggression does just that. You have like 90% accuracy on most things, or not accuracy, 90% crit chance on most things if you're right next to them with a pump action shotgun. So that is going to allow your sawn-off shotguns to do crazy amounts of damage. Next up, you've got the choice between Executioner, Suppression, and Fortify. Fortify keeps your guy alive while they're running behind enemy lines, so I think this is actually kind of important. And while it would be nice to have the utility on Suppression, I feel like without taking Fortify, or at least some sort of defensive perk, your units are likely to die. And that's where the next step comes in. So if you chose not to take Fortify, I would actually recommend taking Implacable. Now, how this works is if you score 1 or more kills on your turn, you're guaranteed a single bonus move. So what happens is, you run up to some guy like a Muton, and you're exposed out in the open, you whip out your sawn-off shotgun, you kill it in 1 hit, and then Implacable procs, and then you just run back to safety. That's one way to use it. The other option is take Bring 'em On for even crazier amounts of damage. Now, there's no way you would ever need Bring 'em On along with a crit from a sawn-off shotgun at any point in the game. But if you want to be a complete madman, you can. This is like the I want to be a madman perk. But generally, if you take Fortify, then you're free to take this if you want, because you have a little bit more defense. I would still recommend taking Implacable even if you took Fortify though, but that's up to you to decide if you want to be extra crazy. This will eventually matter, because there will be things like Mutant Centurions, which may not be guaranteed to die, I think, from a actually, I'm not sure. Does a Mutant Centurion survive a crit from a sawn-off shotgun? It might. I have no clue. But yeah, eventually, before you get your mag shotguns though, Bring 'em On is going to be required to get a one-shot on some of the later game enemies, but if you're still relying on the sawn-off shotgun to kill later game enemies, then Bring 'em On's an okay choice. Alright, next up on the list is Tac Senses versus Rapid Fire. I'm just going to not talk about the Overwatch perks anymore because those are really specific to this line down here. Now, this is another defensive perk. If you really want this guy to just be able to weave in and out of the enemy team, then this is kind of the perk you would take. Now, if you are okay with losing a bit of mobility to take a regular shotgun, now you've actually got something that can kind of act as a, I want to say worse assault, but not necessarily worse. So unlike the assault, it won't have the run and gun, but you can give him a shotgun, and he won't have run and gun, but he can kind of just like run into the back of the enemy team and just kind of use rapid fire as well as the sawn-off shotgun to finish things off. That's the build that I did for the first time when I built the sawn-off shotgun build, and that works out pretty effectively. Tac Senses make sure your guy doesn't die, so that's another choice. I think rapid fire is a good way to round off this build though. I'd say I'd recommend this. Also, another thing is that this class is kind of useless once it runs out of its sawn-off shotgun ammo, so giving it an actual shotgun makes it actually capable of doing other things. And another cool thing about this is that you just have a guy that has like shotguns strapped all over his body. He's got like 2 shots of a shotgun from his back, and he's got another shotgun on the front. Like that's cool, right? You've got like your shotgun specialist. And then finally you get the choice between Rupture and Combat Fitness. I think Rupture is good for utilities purposes. If you don't have the ability to kill a Sectopod, you can at least make it easier for your teammates. Things of that nature are always a really good thing to have. If you feel like you really just need extra stats, +1 mobility is actually a really big deal, as well as the +4 aim and HP. It will actually make a noticeable difference as you're playing with your soldier. You just feel like your soldier's much higher quality. So it's basically, do you want a higher quality soldier or do you want more utility? Personally, I opt for utility, but this has its purposes too. But overall, I would say Combat Fitness is okay for, especially if your soldier has low mobility. I think if your soldier has like 14 mobility, or lower, combat fitness should be the one that you take, just to correct that low mobility. The mobility stat, I've talked about this before on the stream, and I guess I'll talk about this in a different video when I get into more advanced mechanics. But mobility is a stat that is very important. Not only is it important because it's a timed game, right? You have timed missions, so you need to get to the objective on time. But not only that, moving to a flank ups your accuracy to negate the enemy's defenses as well as give you bonus crit damage. If you think about mobility as a damage stat in that regard, it suddenly becomes a lot better, especially when you consider things like shotguns and swords are just high damage weapons that just require you to be next to the enemies. So that means mobility helps deliver you to the enemies, and that's really important. So mobility overall is a really strong perk, and there's definitely nothing wrong with taking this. I think this is another one of those cases of just kind of player choice. You get to choose which one you want to do depending on your playstyles and stuff. But yeah, that's that. That is the Ranger class, and hopefully you guys learned something from this video. And if you did, like and subscribe would be very helpful. Helps out the channel and stuff, and is very much appreciated. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I'll be uploading another one fairly soon. I think the next class we'll do is probably going to be, I don't want to just like go straight in a row where it's like worst class to the best class. So I think the next one we're going to do is actually going to be the Shinobi class, which I consider the best one. And I think this will give you guys an idea of why one class is considered the worst and why another class is considered the best. But of course, even though I say the worst class, as you guys can see here, it's got plenty of purpose. It has its role. You can build it for the 90% of the missions that you will go on, and you have like the choice to build them however you want. Is it useless? Should you just not use it at all? No, that's not the case at all. You can find uses for all of your classes, and that's kind of what I want you guys to take away from this video. So, thanks for watching. Till next time, bye-bye.